At 043 hours, beneath dim hangar lights in eastern England, Captain Daniel Mercer studied the mission board pointing deep into Nazi Germany's industrial heartland. The red thread stretched toward Schweinfurt, a name whispered with dread since earlier raids bled entire bomber groups into falling fire. Mercer felt the weight of command settle heavier than his flight jacket as ground crews loaded ammunition into the waiting B-17. The Boeing B-17 flying fortress crouched on frost-hardened concrete, aluminum skin dull beneath overcast skies, threatening another unforgiving winter crossing. Inside the fuselage, 10 young Americans checked oxygen lines and heated suits, pretending routine familiarity could tame the fear tightening their throats. Staff Sergeant Leo Donnelly traced a gloved hand along the waist gun, murmuring a quiet prayer learned during childhood mass in Boston. The briefing officer's pointer tapped flak concentrations around Schweinfurt, warning of heavy anti-aircraft batteries guarding ball-bearing factories. Vital to Hitler's war machine, P-47 escorts would turn back at the German border, leaving the bomber stream exposed over the most heavily defended airspace in Europe. Mercer met each crewman's eyes, searching for hesitation, finding only the stubborn resolve forged through months of relentless daylight bombing. Engines coughed alive one by one, right cyclones shaking the cold morning as propellers blurred into spinning silver halos. The aircraft rolled toward the runway, past rows of other bombers forming a metallic procession bound for the Reich's industrial spine. As wheels lifted from English soil, Mercer felt the familiar mixture of relief and dread settle into his chest. Over the North Sea, icy drafts slipped through seams, and oxygen masks hissed like mechanical whispers against pale, anxious faces. The formation tightened at 20,000 feet, silver wings glinting weakly through high cloud as contrails stitched the sky. Donnelly scanned empty horizons, knowing German fighters often attacked from the sun, diving unseen until cannons erupted at terrifying range. Radio chatter carried clipped updates from neighboring crews, voices calm but edged with the knowledge that half might not return. Crossing the Dutch coast, black flak bursts began probing the formation, dark blossoms blooming with mathematical precision among aluminum wings. The bomber shuddered as shockwaves rocked its frame, fragments rattling against fuselage like handfuls of thrown gravel. Mercer kept the fortress steady, aware that a single evasive move could unravel the formation and doom another aircraft instead. Then the intercom crackled with a tale. Gunners, urgent warning fighters, approaching fast from high starboard, sunlight flashing off enemy wings. The first Messerschmitt slashed through the formation, noses flashing cannon fire that stitched glowing lines across helpless aluminum skin. Mercer heard Donnelly shout directions as tracers arced outward, the fortress trembling under converging streams of precise German fire. A bomber off their port wing erupted in flame, its right engine shearing away before spiraling earthward in silent catastrophe. The smell of cordite and hot oil filled Mercer's oxygen mask as fragments punched through thin fuselage panels. Bandits breaking high, the tail gunner yelled, voice cracking while empty brass casings clattered against the vibrating floor. Mercer forced himself not to flinch, holding steady altitude, because survival depended more on formation discipline than desperate maneuvering. A burst of 20mm shells tore through the left wing, shredding fabric control surfaces and rupturing fuel lines instantly. Warning lights flickered red across the instrument panel, small glowing omens against the gray daylight flooding the cockpit. The engineer feathered the damaged engine, hands steady despite the violent yaw pulling the aircraft sideways through icy air. Donnelly fired in controlled bursts, watching one fighter flash past so close he glimpsed the pilot's scarf whipping behind glass. Another fortress drifted out of position, trailing smoke, its crew still firing as German fighters circled mercilessly like hawks. The sky above Germany became a layered chaos of contrails, flak bursts, parachutes, and burning wreckage falling toward hidden fields below. Mercer's intercom crackled with reports of wounded gunners, shattered plexiglass, and hydraulic pressure dropping with terrifying speed. He calculated distance to target, knowing turning back now would waste sacrifices already paid in blood. The bombardier crawled forward, checking the Norden bombsight despite the aircraft's violent shuddering under renewed anti-aircraft fire. Heavy flak batteries found their altitude precisely, detonations bracketing the formation with disciplined, industrial efficiency. A direct hit rocked the fortress, throwing Donnelly against the fuselage as jagged daylight pierced through torn metal skin. Smoke seeped into the cockpit, thin at first, then thicker, curling around gauges and choking the already oxygen-starved crew. Mercer ordered fire extinguishers deployed, voice level though he could feel heat spreading beneath his boots. Ahead, through drifting smoke and bursting flak, The smokestacks of Schweinfurt emerged, proof they had reached the heart of the Reich. The smokestacks of Schweinfurt rose through drifting haze, black columns, marking factories that fed the armored divisions grinding across Europe. Mercer leveled the crippled fortress into bombing position, knowing the next 60 seconds would decide whether sacrifice carried meaning. Flak intensified with terrifying accuracy, bursts walking toward them in disciplined patterns calculated by unseen German artillery crews below. The bombardier's voice turned clinical, calling corrections while shattered plexiglass rattled inches from his exposed face. Donnelly ignored blood seeping from a cut above his eye, adjusting aim as another fighter curved upward for a head-on pass. A Focke-Wulf charged directly at their nose, cannons blazing, forcing Mercer to resist, every instinct screaming to break formation. The two aircraft closed at combined speeds beyond reason, metal and courage hurtling toward collision in cold, thin air. Donnelly's guns thundered, tracers converging until the German fighter snapped sideways, trailing smoke and vanished beneath them. There was no time to celebrate. The flak pattern tightened again, exploding so near the fortress lurched violently downward. Bombs away, the bombardier announced, voice strangely calm as the aircraft lifted slightly with sudden release. Mercer held steady for precious seconds after drop, ensuring the pattern stayed true over the ball-bearing works below. Through breaks in smoke, he glimpsed explosions rippling across factory roofs, orange flashes against grim industrial gray. A sharp jolt slammed the cockpit, shattering remaining glass and sending freezing wind howling across instrument panels. The navigator reported they were losing fuel rapidly, the ruptured wing tank bleeding precious range into empty sky. Escorts were gone now, long turned back, leaving only scattered bombers fighting alone above the Reich. German fighters regrouped for another assault, climbing methodically to exploit the fortress's damaged engine and sagging altitude. Donnelly's ammunition belts ran thin, each remaining round weighed against the approaching shapes growing larger by seconds. Mercer considered turning west immediately, but stragglers drew the fiercest attacks from relentless Luftwaffe pilots. A final coordinated strike tore through the formation, and another nearby bomber folded in half under concentrated cannon fire. The shockwave rocked Mercer's aircraft again, and this time the wounded fortress began slipping unmistakably out of formation. The fortress sagged below the protective box formation, its wounded engine coughing smoke as altitude bled away foot by dangerous foot. Mercer pushed the throttles forward despite vibration, and willing to surrender even 100 feet to the waiting fighters circling above. The remaining bombers continued west in disciplined silence, their survival dependent on leaving stragglers to fate. Donnelly watched them drift farther away, feeling isolation settle heavier than the freezing wind tearing through shattered metal. A lone Messerschmitt broke formation and rolled toward them, sensing weakness the way predators sense injured prey. With ammunition nearly gone, Donnelly fired short, deliberate bursts, each squeeze measured like a gambler counting final coins. The fighter overshot but returned quickly, joined now by another aircraft climbing patiently into attack position. Mercer ordered ballast jettison and unnecessary gear thrown overboard, shaving weight in desperate exchange for fragile altitude. Inside the fuselage, crewmen heaved ammunition boxes and damaged equipment into the rushing sky below. The engineer reported fuel critically low, calculating they might reach the Dutch coast if no further engines failed. A sudden metallic shriek announced more hits along the tail, and the aircraft yelled violently to port. The rudder cables felt spongy beneath Mercer's boots, controls responding with frightening delay. Donnelly shifted positions to cover the exposed sector, knowing one accurate burst could finish them. Instead of pressing the attack, the German fighters held distance, shadowing the crippled bomber like patient executioners. Minutes stretched unbearably as the fortress limped westward, engines droning unevenly over hostile farmland. Below, anti-aircraft guns continued firing at retreating formations, stray bursts rising dangerously close to their path. The navigator confirmed they had crossed back over the Rhine, but Germany still lay vast and unforgiving ahead. Oxygen levels fluctuated as ice formed inside damaged lines, forcing the crew to clear valves with trembling hands. Through cracked cockpit glass, Mercer saw the fighters reposition once more, lining up for what felt like a final pass. Then, unexpectedly, the lead German fighter slid closer on their wing so near. Mercer could see the pilot's face watching him. The German fighter held steady off their wingtip, so close Mercer could see frost tracing the edges of its canopy. No tracers came, no cannon flashes, only the steady presence of an enemy who had every advantage in altitude and speed. Donnelly kept his gun trained, finger tense on the trigger, and sure whether hesitation meant mercy or calculated cruelty. The Luftwaffe pilot gestured subtly with his hand, pointing downward toward the damaged fortress's leaking wing. Mercer followed the gesture, realizing flames flickered faintly along a torn fuel line. They could not see from inside. Smoke thickened behind them, a dark ribbon advertising their vulnerability across the pale winter sky. The German fighter edged closer still, rocking its wings deliberately as if issuing instructions rather than threats. Over the intercom, confusion rippled through the crew, some believing it a trap before the inevitable execution. Mercer steadied his breathing and matched the fighter's slight descent, unsure whether obedience meant survival or surrender. The enemy pilot pointed, again this time toward the west, then made a slicing motion across his own throat. The meaning settled coldly. More fighters waited ahead, and alone the fortress would never outrun them. Donnelly's anger flared at the absurdity of accepting guidance from a man sworn to destroy them minutes earlier. Yet the flames along the wing brightened briefly, licking dangerously near the remaining fuel tank. Mercer ordered the engineer to attempt another extinguisher discharge through the damaged section. Despite dwindling reserves, the German fighter maintained position, neither firing nor breaking away, escorting them like a grim guardian. Below, villages and rail lines slid past, witnesses unaware of the fragile negotiation unfolding miles above. The fortress shuddered again, altitude dropping steadily despite every pound of discarded weight. Mercer realized their only hope lay not in defiance, but in trusting the inexplicable restraint of an adversary. He adjusted course slightly westward, following the fighter's lead while keeping his guns ready for betrayal. Ahead, distant spakes appeared against the horizon, additional aircraft climbing fast toward their vulnerable path.